Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Whole Mom Summit. I'm Jennifer Bloomingdale, one of your co-hosts. Today, I have Karen Delano. She is a certified parent and family life coach. She helps moms find a way to live life based on their values without being distracted by all the pressures from society. She also shares skills and strategies to reduce kids' challenging behaviors so families have more time, energy, and joy. Welcome, Karen.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So glad to have you. To get started, I'd love to know a little bit more about your family, about what you do, where you are.
Yeah, sure. So I live outside of Boston and I have three kids. I have a son who's 13, a daughter who's 11, and my youngest son is 9.
Great. Fun ages.
Yes, actually, yeah, they are great ages
Yeah.
because they're very independent,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but they still don't mind being home and doing things with me, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, it's good.
Kind of like I've read an article one time about like the sweet spot. Do you feel like you're in the sweet spot of parenting?
Yeah, I feel like for the last few years
Mm-hmm.
I have been. So I really am enjoying it.
Great. Which actually might lead me to my next question. Is Sarah and I had talked a lot about gratitude and how important it is as moms to practice gratitude. So we've been kicking off our interviews wondering what is one thing you're grateful for?
So one thing, obviously there are many, but
Okay.
one thing I had been thinking about this morning was just the season. It's
Mhm.
fall here, so it's like I just love the different colors and the like crisp air
Mhm.
outside. I don't know, it's just kind of energizing and everything. So I don't know. It's like easy to go places because there's no snow. It's like, it's like nice to be outside and be able
Mhm.
to move around without it being real hot. Yeah, I was just
Right.
noticing.
We're in the same exact, I'm up in New York, so we're in the same exact season as you guys. I know exactly what you're talking about. We've had a few days though this week that we have needed those winter coats and we weren't quite ready for it,
Yeah.
but everything is still beautiful. And you're right, just being able to be outside and not be too hot, not be too cold. It's been really nice. So
Well, I will say we have broken out the winter coats
you
also,
have
but
to.
it's like the day warms up a
Yep.
bit still, so it's okay.
Right. We'll take it for now.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. So I know you talk a lot about peaceful homes, and one thing that we were thinking about is routines and how that supports peaceful homes. So I'm wondering in your work, how do you find that having routines supports a peaceful home environment?
Yeah, so I do think routines are like one of the keys to having a peaceful home and really just making your life a lot easier
Mhm.
as a parent. And there are so many reasons why, but specifically for kids, when there's a sense of order and security and knowing what's going to happen, they usually have fewer challenging behaviors because they don't have that stress of the unknown. They also are more likely to listen when you do talk because you don't have to tell them what to do as much. They just know what needs to happen. So that's always a good thing when we don't have to constantly repeat
Mhm.
ourselves. Um, and another thing for parents, especially, it's like decision fatigue is a real thing. So the fewer like little decisions we need to make on, an everyday basis, especially when it's like shoes and brushing teeth, like if those things could just happen, we could focus on more important things like our relationship and our connection with our kids and have other conversations during transition times rather than just what needs to happen.
Mhm. That makes sense. I know a lot of parents might be wondering, okay, where do I start? So I figured we'd break it up into morning routine and nighttime routine. So
Sure.
my first question would be, what do you recommend parents consider when planning a morning routine? So maybe, they see, okay, there's value in this. How do I get started?
Yeah. And one thing to do is to remember to involve your kids
Mhm.
either way, because, when we can give them some independence and some, control over their own lives, they have less of a need to be oppositional and it reduces power struggles and stuff. So that's something to keep in mind, whether it's a morning routine or a nightly routine, is to make sure they play some part in coming up with the routine.
Okay.
But the first thing to do is to figure out what needs to happen. And the great thing is that you're probably already doing all these things. So it should be pretty easy to just make a quick list, like what needs to get done. And then this is where you can bring the kids in. You can get their input, like, well, maybe they have a certain order they would like to do things in, and having some conversations about that. And I always like to suggest having visuals. Kids are very visual learners. And that way, if your kids can't read yet either, having pictures, even pictures that they draw, can be really helpful. And so if they have, you could take like index cards, little pieces of paper, something for them to draw the tasks that need to happen, and then arrange them in the order that they can happen. So that's a good way to get them involved, right? Because then if they're following the plan, it's kind of their plan. And kids are going to typically follow their plan rather than yours. Right. But you're still in control, right? Because you set the parameters of like what needs to get done, and then you're giving them some freedom within that.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about for morning routines? And I love the idea of letting the kids have a say in the routine. And now what about prepping ahead? What are your thoughts on like the parents prepping stuff ahead of time at night?
Yeah. So one thing I would also suggest with routines is when you are making them and you have all the tasks and the order they need to get done, is then thinking, well, can my kids do these things?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I make it so my child can accomplish the task without needing me, or without needing me as much, right? So a lot of this is trying to transfer some independence and skills to our kids, because they feel really good about themselves when they can do things. So it's not like you have to do this all by yourself, right? But it's like,
Right.
hey, I bet you could manage doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and you know your kids based on their ages, what they can handle.
Right.
So parents can think about, okay, well, can my child reach the sink to brush their teeth? Do they know how to open the cap? Do they know how much toothpaste to put on? And kind of like even further too, teaching some skills like, well, what happens if toothpaste gets all over the counter? Right? Do your kids know what to do? Like, should they use a paper towel or a rag? And can they access those? So really setting each task up for success can be really helpful for the parent to do. So that might be doing something at night to set things up. Maybe you put, if you don't have their bowls and plates down low, maybe you do set some out on the counter the night before. So when they get up, they can get their own breakfast because they can reach things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just throughout the day that you're teaching new skills, giving them time to practice pouring so that they can pour milk into their cereal or things like that.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say too, like you mentioned, practicing the skills, it might take a little time for them to really get there, right? So maybe having that patience too.
Yeah, and thinking like,
okay.
Oh, wow, yes, definitely patience. And like, how can we make it easier, right? So maybe you don't want your child pouring the whole big gallon of milk, right? And it's like, well, you don't have to give them the whole gallon. What if you poured it into a smaller container? Mm-hmm. And that was on the door of the refrigerator so they could easily reach it, right? So we can start with like adjusting where we need to so it's comfortable for everybody. Because obviously you're not saving time or stress if a whole gallon of milk goes
right
on the kitchen floor.
Great. All right. So I like that balance of parent prepping, but prepping to support the independence of their child through these routines and building up to that independence.
Yeah. And you had mentioned specifically at night, like if parents could do certain things. Mm-hmm. I find a lot of the parents I work with are just exhausted at
Mm.
night. That it's like, okay, and now you want me to get ready for morning? You know?
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, we don't have to do it at night,
Right.
right? It's like, if we can think of how we can get it easier for our kids to do it, then
Mhm.
that's helpful. And if you have really young kids, I think it's helpful for the parent to have their own list of what they need to do. I used to do this. I ran a play school from my home. And so I not only had to get my 3 kids out of the house to school and myself ready, but like set up for the school. And so I started making checklists, even for little things like open the curtains. And it was amazing how such a simple thing could really help the flow of the morning, because we could get interrupted, have a conversation about something, and then it's like I didn't have to think about what I needed to do again. I could just look at the list and it's like, okay,
Right.
then you just do it.
I love lists. I definitely agree with that one. I agree with everything you're saying, but yes, lists. I use them quite a bit at my house as well. All right. So anything else specific for morning routine that you can think of that we didn't touch on?
Um, I think the other thing to consider is what is your interaction with your child when they're first getting up?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, sometimes it's like we know we need to get up and get somewhere. So it's like we wake them up and it's like, come on, like, let's get ready. Right. But what if like we took some time and like thought about, well, what are the first things we say to our kids? How do we greet them in the morning and approach things? Because I think that can really decide how the morning's going to go, right?
Right.
Is how we respond and um, interact with our kids.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you bringing that up or mentioning that as well. Because, like you said, sometimes we're so ready to go that we forget that they're not quite ready to go and they're still sleepy. And I know for me, for a while, and I haven't been since school started because it's been crazy, but I was getting up before them.
Yeah.
And in greeting them after I had had that quiet time by myself, I was able to greet them calmly and that with a huge smile on my face, not half asleep. And it doesn't happen all the time, but I know for myself, it helps start the day on a more positive note. And I imagine it did for them too.
That's awesome that you noticed that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I actually have a friend, Lindsay McCarthy, who wrote a book with her husband, The Miracle Morning for Parents and Families. So, yeah, it's all about starting the day doing something for you and like getting started on the right foot,
Mhm.
which you can involve your kids in that. Sometimes our kids get up so early, we can't necessarily beat them to.
That is kind of what started happening here. But I love the idea of involving them in that too. And I haven't quite given that thought because I was doing something similar to, I know we're getting a little off topic, but I was doing something similar to morning routine or no, miracle morning. But when they started getting up so much earlier, it was hard for me to do that. I really love the idea and involving them in that too.
Well, yeah, because if we think about the benefits to us as
Mhm.
adults for doing it, right? It's like, well, we want the same great things for our kids, so it's great to involve them.
Right. And for people that might not be familiar with Miracle Morning, it's kind of and maybe you might need to help me here because I don't quite remember, but it's reading, maybe journaling, exercise,
Yeah,
routine,
so
right? Something like that.
Miracle Morning, the adult version, has an acronym SAVERS.
Mhm.
And they actually, in the one for parents and families, they changed it to CHARMS because their son was like, why do I need to save my life? So they came up with a new acronym, and it was creativity, health, affirmations, are reading, meditating, and service.
Mhm.
So doing something. And you can combine those, right? Like it doesn't
Right,
have, it's like not meant to be a stressful thing to add to your morning, right? But
right.
it's like, well, how can we be reflective and start our day helping others and having a healthy breakfast and maybe journaling or, yeah, just getting started in a positive way.
Right. I love that. I need to go find that book. I did not realize there was a family version, so I need to,
Yeah,
I
it's
need to go
awesome.
find that.
Really good.
That's amazing. Thank you. So
Yeah.
now that we've kind of talked about morning, nighttime, I know can be another stressor for parents when kids don't want to go to bed or homework, sports, things like that. What are some things that you recommend parents considering when developing a nighttime routine?
Yeah. So for the nighttime routine, I'm glad you brought up sports. Because we think we need to consider like what can get in the way, right? We might think of like, oh, this is an awesome thing. So right after dinner, we're going to have a bath and we're going to get in pajamas and play games. And then it's like, oh, but the kids have a sport and we're not home until 7. And right. So factoring that in. And so maybe you have a separate routine on nights that bedtime doesn't, like the routine doesn't start until later.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a more condensed version. But I would say the key is consistency as much as you can keep the same steps, even if maybe sometimes they're shorter.
Mm-hmm.
That can be really helpful. And then also planning backwards. So thinking like, what time does my child need to be in bed? Like, and even starting like, okay, what time do they need to get up in the morning?
Right.
How many hours of sleep do they need to get? How long does it usually take to unwind? So then what time do they need to be in bed? And then working backwards, because if we don't have a time in mind that we should start our routine, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock. Come on, we got to get ready for bed quick. And it's like, okay, well, when I'm rushing, it's not relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So our kids are like, what? No, I was playing, So
Right.
it can be really helpful for us as the parent to be like, okay, well, I know I'm going to say something at a certain time and it's going to be around 6:30, 7, hopefully within a half an hour either way.
Okay. Any other thoughts for bedtime that they should keep in mind?
Yeah. So I have lots of thoughts on bedtime, and a lot of it is specific to your family, but considering what the day is like for your child, do they have time to play? Have they had time to be outside? Have they had time to be creative? Our kids need all that time during the day and connection time with us, or they're going to have a harder time going to sleep.
Okay.
Right. So those are things that hopefully we can make sure they get in during the day. And another thing that I'm finding is a lot of kids, we need to teach some skills on how do they relax? How do they fall asleep?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we're kind of like, okay, get in bed, good night, go to sleep. But we don't really talk about, well, how do you sleep? Because most people don't really just get into bed and fall right asleep. Sometimes I think we wish we had little switches on them.
Right.
Where's that off button?
Yeah.
At least a pause button.
Right.
Right. But so are there breathing techniques that you can teach them? One thing that we've done is have the kids put a stuffed animal on their belly and then practice like making it go up and down and with their breath. And sometimes kids are going to think this is crazy at first and they're going to be silly and like try to rock it off. Well, my kids have done that, right? But it's like, if we just like do it beside them and model it and like don't get worked up when they do those silly things, and we just keep being like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to try. And right, just if we can stay calm, it usually brings our kids back to calm.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if we start to get upset and then go to sleep, like, why do you always do this? It doesn't calm their bodies. So it is hard to stay calm. I totally can relate to that. But the more we can stay calm, and so that's why modeling some of this to our kids can be really helpful, because we're also breathing
Right.
at the same time. You could get like a meditation CD. I mean, we don't use CDs anymore, right? But like recording.
Mm-hmm.
we've done one before with dinosaurs, and it kind of walked like the little dinosaur through lying down in the cave in the soft sand and talking about stretching different parts of the body. So there's all different versions of meditations for kids to sleep.
Mhm.
And even having conversations with your kids, like, it's bedtime, I expect this to happen, right? Like, maybe I expect you to be in your bed, and if your body's not ready for sleep, or if you can't sleep yet, you can do this, right? Like, well, maybe for you it's okay if they have a few stuffed animals on their bed and play. Maybe you found that doesn't, like, let your child relax and fall asleep, right? So maybe you have your child read books, or maybe, they can't read yet, but they could do a Where's Waldo, right? So there's, you know your child and kind of what excites them and what relaxes them. So kind of help them figure out what works for them.
Mhm. Great. Those are some wonderful tips. Thank you. So my next question would be, you shared some great things to consider when putting things in place for a new routine. What would you, what's the top things they need to consider when implementing a new routine? If their kids maybe are fighting them on it or resisting it, or it seems overwhelming to implement a new routine. How do you suggest they get started?
Yeah. And so I would suggest picking one part of your day that does seem really stressful and chaotic, and picking that one part to start with, right? Like, don't try to do the morning routine and the bedtime routine at once. Like, we'll pick one small spot in the day. And, we're talking about morning and bedtime, but it could be after school
Mm-hmm.
too, or after work. So the same types of concepts apply, but really just picking that one time and knowing that it's an experiment too, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, we're going to try this, and we're going to try this for a couple weeks, and we're going to see how it goes. It doesn't have to be the routine you stay with for 10 years, right? Like, our kids do change pretty fast, and what works for a couple months might not
Mm-hmm.
a couple months later, especially if a season changes, right? Um, and it's light later and all that. Um, so times might change, but typically a lot of the activities, the tasks will stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I know, so for us, one example of willing to be flexible is my daughter would take a long time eating breakfast, but that was one of the first things she wanted to do. And so we still had to rush through the rest of the morning. And so I was like, hey, it seems like we're still rushing, and we wanted to use the routine to make our morning smoother. What do you think we should do? And so she actually was like, I think I should eat breakfast last. She was like, because then I can relax when I'm eating, because I know I'll be all ready. And I was like, then let's try that. And so we switched that, and it was awesome. And it's like, oh my gosh, like a little change, right? So usually if we involve our kids, they are more likely to cooperate, right? Like, to let them know, okay, we're on the same side, we're on the same team. So how can we solve this together? And listening to their input, because a lot of times our kids are pretty wise. They actually can know themselves quite well if we don't overpower and say, but no, you can't be hungry when you first wake up, because whatever, like, you
Right.
always eat breakfast at 10 o'clock, but it's like, well, maybe they are hungry, and that's why they have a rough morning, because, if they're like me, then when I don't have food, I'm not very easy to get along with.
As I'm sure many of us are not.
Yes.
Great. All right. So then my next question is, and this kind of will go in this, I think you might have answered this already. I think, yes, you did, but I'll ask it in case you have any other thoughts to add. What's the best place to start when establishing a new routine?
Yes. So and I don't think I mentioned this before, but a lot of it is really getting clear on like what you want it to be like.
Mm.
And so it might not be like a picture even, it might even just be a feeling. Like, how do you want morning to go in your house? Do you want it to be calm and relaxing? Do you want it to be energizing? Right? So there's no wrong way, but I do think we get a lot of messages from society, like what a morning should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's not happy kids. And that's okay, right? Like we don't have to make everybody happy, and we don't all have to become morning people. But right, but like what do you want your kids to like start the day feeling? What do you want to feel in the morning? And starting there, because I think that can help figure out how you want to work things and set things up.
Mm-hmm. That sounds wonderful. Wonderful. I love the idea of starting with the feeling of what is your ultimate, and not even ultimate goal, but I guess it is kind of a goal, but how you want to feel in the morning and how you want your kids, if they're leaving for school, how you want them to feel when they leave the house.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
So
welcome.
as we begin to wrap up, before I do, is there any other things that we didn't get to cover that you want to mention?
Well, when you were asking about things people should keep in mind if they feel overwhelmed or whatever, it's just it might not go perfectly every day, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that you need to scrap the whole thing, right? Like some days are just harder days. And it's like, okay, but like if you commit to trying something for a little while and you feel like good about committing to it, it's easier to be like I see you don't want to brush your teeth, and we decided we were going to brush our teeth after we had breakfast. So how can I help you? Right? So a lot of times to get kids back on track, if they're not wanting to do what they said they were going to do, is to offer help.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just that, like that attitude of being on the same team and like being willing to support each other is all that they need to like get started back on track and like keep going on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So that can help.
Great, thank you. Because in my head, I'm thinking, I know, my son will be excited to start or work together on a morning routine. Because actually, this has been a topic on my mind, so I'm so glad I got to speak with you. But I know there might be some days where he gets excited about it, and then be like, "No, I don't want to get up and do that or do this." So I like that idea of approaching it as, "How can I help you?" and not being like, "Okay, you said you would do this, now go do this." But how can I
Yeah.
support you in moving through our routine?
Yeah. And things like, are your kids gonna be more likely to want to get up and do something if you're fun and like playful, or if you're like demanding and controlling, right? So like, no, come on, you need to get out of bed now. Or, how could I help you get out of bed? Could like the tickle worm help? Or, like just
Right.
like getting them to be kind of excited to be around you
Mhm.
can help.
Right.
Um, And it's easy when we're trying to get somewhere, and as an adult, we get stressed. Like if we have to be to work on time or catch the bus, like our kids need to be at the bus stop. Um, so it can be really easy to focus on, if we're stressed, it's kind of like, well, I'm stressed, and so my child is doing this to me, and I'm going to take away a privilege or punish them somehow. But what if it was like we focused on the good and, okay, like what will we get to do if we get our stuff done? Right? So maybe it's like, oh, well, if we can get this done, like we'll have time to kick the soccer ball in the yard for a few minutes. Or, if we get this done, we'll have time to listen to that song you like. Or, thinking of it that way, like what's the incentive? Like, why would they want to keep going? Rather than taking something away or
Right.
giving kind of false threats. Because a lot of times we'll be like, well, then you're not going to soccer later. And it's like, but then soccer comes and they go.
Right. Great. Well, thank you. I'm glad you shared that. As we begin to wrap up, Sarah and I have also been asking all of our speakers, all of our moms, what their favorite 5-minute self-care ritual is.
Yeah. So I love the question because it is so important to take care of ourselves. And so my favorite thing is my morning cup of coffee and being able to sit there and enjoy that. It's like a way I can start the day for myself. And it's funny because obviously we're talking about morning routines, right?
Right.
And that is kind of why I think I feel so strongly that morning routines are important, because it's like, okay, well, how can I set things up so I actually can sit for 5 minutes and drink my coffee? And part of that is like making sure everybody knows what they need to be doing. Um, and when the kids were younger, it was like, okay, you can come sit with me if you want. Like, what are you gonna drink? Like, are you gonna have not coffee, but like, could they drink water out of a mug? Um, can they play quietly, right? Like letting people know what the expectation is can be really helpful to make sure you get that time.
Get your 5 minutes.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. So my next question is, where can people find you online? And I know you have a freebie for everyone watching as well, right?
I do, yes. So I guess the easiest place to find me is on Facebook. So I actually have a group of amazing moms who support each other and inspire each other and ask questions. It is the Simplicity Moms Club Facebook group. And then the freebie is on how you can get your mornings set up for success.
Great.
And it's a lot of what I've said with some more examples of real life things that have worked for others. And it just walks you through all the steps. And there's a sheet you can print out or even just look at and fill out as you go along so you can make the routine work for you.
Great. Thank you. That sounds wonderful. And then to kind of recap some of your main points, I know my biggest takeaway from all that you shared is involving your kids in making these routines. Also thinking about when you're thinking about where to start, find the time, start small, find the time that is most hectic and work from there and then build upon that. Are there any other main points that I missed before we go?
I don't think so. I think that's awesome. And there's no one right way.
Right.
It's like what works for you is awesome.
I love it. Empowering everybody to figure out what works for them.
Yes.
Great. All right. So thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure I will talk to you again.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Sure.